You might be asking, if leadership is so awesome, which indeed it is, how do I get some? And there are quite a few theories about how great leaders are created. Are they made or are they born? And the first researcher who sort of put a line in the sand was Sir Francis Galton. And he was truly a Renaissance man. He did most of his work around the 1850s, 1860s. He was a statistician. Any statistics geeks here? Yeah? He invented the correlation coefficient. Pretty cool. He was also an astronomer, a meteorologist, a sociologist, an anthropologist, and he was one of the proponents of something called eugenics. And you probably heard of that, very, very controversial. His whole theory was great people are born. There is no way that you can become more great because it is within you when you're born. And so eugenics was actually, how can we get the best people to procreate and the worst people to maybe not procreate, right? So there's a variety of issues and concerns with that. But as it relates to leadership, right, he said great leaders unequivocally are born. And this was a theory and a prevailing wisdom that continued for decades and decades and decades until in 1945, researchers at Ohio State University came upon a pretty huge discovery. They were convinced, for whatever reason, that traits or inborn personality, it was not what explains leadership effectiveness. So they set out to prove that it was in fact behaviors of the leaders. So they looked at 70 international harvester foremen, right? They got a huge sample of people, and they went around and they asked their employees what they were doing. They looked at assessments and measures of their leaders' effectiveness, and here's what they found. They found two behaviors that the most effective leaders engaged in, period. So they immediately disproved the notion that traits or personality characteristics are what make great leaders. So these behaviors were independent of any traits that the leaders showed. And they were two things. The first was something they called consideration. Consideration is exactly what it sounds like. It is being kind. It is treating their employees like humans, coaching them, helping them succeed, and supporting them. The second behavior they found was called initiating structure. And what that was the more results-oriented notion of leadership. It was setting goals. It was holding them accountable. That sort of holding people accountable thing, that was really one of the places that started. So the Ohio State researchers gave us a lot. And I am the daughter of a graduate of the University of Michigan. So for me to say that Ohio State really helped us out a lot is a pretty big gamble. But I feel confident, right? And so it's like the couch cushion in the remote. This has been here all along, and nobody talks about it. We learn about it in grad school, and then we kind of move on to the latest and greatest and sexiest studies. But I think this is where we have to spend our time. So if we take those two behaviors, consideration and initiating structure, and we use some more accessible words, here's what I like. People and results, okay? So a people-focused leader is somebody who really wants their employees to be engaged, to be motivated. They want to coach their employees. They want them to be as successful as possible and create a great environment for their employees. A more results-focused leader is the person who says, I don't care what you do all day, but you need to deliver the results that we're here to deliver, okay? Now, the interesting thing about Ohio State is they found that these two behaviors were actually independent of each other. So what does that mean? It means you can be high on both, you can be low on both, you can be high on one and low on the other. And so as I read this, and as I've worked with leaders for more than a decade now, it became clear to me that the root cause of a lot of this problem and tension and complexity with leadership is this tension between people and results. So you think, I can make my people happy, or I can drive the results I need for the business. I can create a great environment, or I can be a slave driver and make people just produce and churn out results. So what I typically see, if you think about this like a continuum, is that every person in this room is going to fall somewhere in that continuum between people and results. For example, you could be all the way over on the people side, and we'll talk about some of the disadvantages of that in a second. That means that you are ultimately most comfortable focusing on creating happy people, putting people first. You could be all the way on the other side, on the right side, and be a results-focused leader who focuses on the numbers and the contribution of your department at all costs. Most of us tend to fall somewhere in the middle, right? So I want you to just take a look at that and imagine that it's a scale. And I want you to place yourself where you typically feel most comfortable. When it comes down to it, if you have to make the decision, are you more likely to want to make somebody happy? Or are you more likely to need to get the results from them, okay? So to illustrate this tension, typically what I talk about are the extremes. And they are usually the most comical, but they're also the most illustrative. So I'm going to give you just the most extreme version on either side, and then we'll talk about really how that's not the best thing at the end of the day. So the people-focused leader. I use the term left side leader. It is not rocket science. It is because it is on the left of the spectrum. It's very sophisticated. So the left side leader is considered the cool parent of leaders. What does the cool parent do? They don't set expectations. They don't want to upset their kids by giving them boundaries or discipline. It's just do what you want, I'm your friend, right? That's the cool parent leader. This person is focused on morale above all. Now this might sound pretty great. A lot of times people hear this and they say, I want to work for this person, right? Some of you laugh knowingly. Maybe you have worked for this person, and it was probably great for about, 3 months? And then after 3 months, strange things probably started to happen. I worked for this leader for quite a while, and I adored this person. But after a while, what I started to notice is I was getting zero feedback. We would have performance reviews, and we would sit down, and she would say, Tasha, you are doing an outstanding job. Keep it up. And I would say, is it over? Are we done? And that was the end of the performance review, right? I would hear all the great things I did and none of the terrible things I did. And I knew that I was doing some things that I needed to improve. So after a while, if you're working for the left side leader, you begin to crave honesty. You become confused when this leader has to communicate changes that might not be really positive. They kind of dance around it, right? And then they're not direct. And it becomes incredibly confusing and very frustrating in the long term. Let's look at the right side leader. This is the trail of dead bodies. Again, you laugh because you have worked for this person. So shortly after I concluded working with my left side leader, I took a position to work for somebody who, within the first day, it was pretty clear to me, lived not just there, but maybe in the parking lot on the right side. Okay? This person was focused on results above all. Here's how I learned at first that he was this type of leader. It was probably my 3rd week on the job. I was working late on a Friday. It was maybe 5 or 5:30. And I was trying to get things done before I left for the weekend, because in Colorado, that's really late to stay on a Friday. And my phone rang. And I picked up my phone, and it was my boss. And I said, hello, what can I do for you? And he said, just calling to make sure you're still here. This is true. This happened. So that was my indication immediately that this person craved results at all costs. He was very famous for asking people to work until 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night if he needed them to do that. And you can imagine, we'll talk about this, but over time, that starts to become really challenging for a couple of reasons. Physically, it's hard. It is hard to sustain that level of work. Mentally, psychologically, it becomes demoralizing. You start to get resentful of this person. I'm doing everything I can for you, and you're still making me work harder and harder and harder. When does it end? And so you can see that the collateral damage for a right side leader and a left side leader is equally bad, but completely different. Okay? So those are the archetypes or the parallels. Now, I want to bring us back to reality and bring us back to actually the positive thing that we're striving for, and tell you that the most effective leaders do what I call moving to the middle. This term, sometimes people can misinterpret this, so I want to be really clear about what I do mean and what I don't mean. So let's say that you're a P, right? You're a left side leader to the extreme. For you, moving to the middle does not mean that you're going to abandon this focus that you have on creating a great environment and putting your people first. You don't want to lose that. That's actually, remember, in the Ohio State studies, one of the 2 behaviors that you want. What moving to the middle means in this model is actually starting to acquire some of the behaviors from the other side of the spectrum. So what that means, if I'm a left side leader and I move to the middle, it means that I'm learning to have some of those tough conversations and to give that feedback to people that makes me just quake when I think of the mere thought of it. But I'm learning how to even out my leadership so that I'm doing both of those behaviors that the Ohio State studies came up with. Does that make sense? So moving to the middle. I was sitting down with one of my coaching clients who's an SVP at a pretty big oil and gas company this week, and I was telling him about moving to the middle and what does that mean, and he just started laughing. And I said, oh my gosh, this sounds really interesting. And he told me about one of his mentors from his first job, who's he's still kept in touch with, and he's in his 50s now. And the boss mentored him, and my client always felt like he was so attuned to the left side. For an engineer in oil and gas, he was just astounded that his boss was able to do this so well. So he decided one day to sit him down and say, what's your secret? Are you just this type of person and you happen to pick engineering? And his boss started laughing and said, no, I hate that stuff. I absolutely hate it. But I have learned that I will not be successful in this world unless I can develop those skills. So again, remember when I said sometimes leadership seems really easy? It went on the outside. My Psychology 100 professor commanding the room for 200 people, it seems so easy. But when you peel back the layers, and when he peeled back the layers for his boss, it's actually harder than we think. And this person was probably working hard every single day to move to the middle.